Hi, Peter Charles here, folks, for Life Fly Fishing. And today we're going to look at an issue I've raised a few times, and that's about matching the streamer to our local river, to the waters we're going to fish. So I thought, I can talk about fast flows, slow flows, turbulent flows, smooth flows, but if you don't have a mental image of what that really means, it gets a bit tough. So I thought, you know what, I'm going to take some of my flies and also match them up to still images I have of various rivers across the continent. And we can talk about the different conditions that we face and the type of flies I would use. So first off, you can see what I've got here is my Perch Pattern, which has a very flat wing. I've pushed the wing right down on top of the hook. And if you've seen any of my streamer fly tying videos, you know that's how I like to tie. So here's a few here. We've got a couple of bucktails. That's one of my feather wings, and this is a feather wing I bought in Maine. So we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But generally, I try to keep the wing flat, and we'll get into why I do that. But West Coast patterns are often kicked up at an angle like this. Let me back up for a second there. Can I back up? Come on, back up. Back up. There we go. You see there's a West Coast pattern. You see that wing kicked up at an angle right there. And that, the idea behind that is when you're in heavy current and that wing is up like this, the heavy current is knocking it down, and then it pops up, knocks down, pops up, knocks down, and then it ends up going like this. And that, that's quite a fish attractor, something that's vibrating like that. In heavy current, you need a stiff wing that's going to vibrate. That's why feather wings aren't always recommended for heavy flows, because they can get knocked down. So, okay, let's get going again. So there's my brown trout Weimer pattern. Now, okay, I don't want to turn this into commercial for the brown trout Weimer. Trust me, I don't get any money when you watch my view. Beyond the advertising, there's nothing in there. But I got to say, this style of fly that has a large head and a bulky body, I don't, not too much, because then if the drag goes up, that'll pull the fly up. But, within reason, if the body's bulky and the head is bulky, it creates turbulence. And that turbulence kicks the materials around, and then that looks alive. And it works in slow currents and it works in fast currents. In slow currents, all that marabou and that goat hair are always moving. In the fast currents, you've got the underbody or underwing of bucktail tied over that yarn body, so that keeps it from collapsing, and you've got that large head and the thick body that creates turbulence. It kicks all the materials around. So it works slow currents, really slow currents, and it works in fast currents too. Plus, it has a light wire hook. So when it's very slow currents and you're just swinging very slowly, it doesn't sag like this. And, the back end of the hook is way down here because it's a light wire hook. So, I'm going to talk about these three flies I'm showing and where I would use them. Here, left pane is the Cattaraugus River in western New York, and the right pane is the Grand River just near Fergus, Ontario. And though the Cattaraugus has its fast stretches, a lot of it is relatively flat and smooth with moderate currents. Same as the Grand. The Grand is a low gradient river, so it doesn't get much more than the classic riffle run pool construction. And you don't need anything more in my Perch Pattern. That will work just fine. Keep in mind it looks rather flat now while it's dry. When it's wet, it fluffs up. But it won't fluff up a lot. So it still keeps that slim baitfish profile even when stripped in slow currents. Now, you can't really swing that really well in slow currents because it won't look very good, but anything, moderate currents, walking pace currents and up, you can swing it just fine. At slow currents, you'll have to strip it. But other than that, you're good to go. And in these slow, it gives you the ability to go from moderate current to slow current back to moderate current, and you can switch around. Here's another example. You've got up the top of this, right around about in here, you've got, get rid of that. You've got some riffles, and below that you have a slow pool. And here's another example. This is a sardine. you know, Saugeen has some fast stretches, has some whitewater stretches. There's some spots are good for kayakers because they're so quick. But a lot of it looks like this, where you want to use something like my perch pattern or my Weimer pattern. If you don't, if you use a Western style pattern, it looks weird. It looks like it's coming through the water like this. Again, here's another problem where you get multiple scenarios on the same river. In this case, it's Penns Creek in Pennsylvania. You got this beautiful flat pool, wide pool, slow pool, where I can swing that Weimer very lazily and it'll come across. And then look at below here, right in here. You've got that fast current. And it's, you know, the gradient really kicks up there and it plummets. So if you're going to go fish that, you might want a Western pattern with that high wing, but you could also use a Weimer in there too. It'll work just as fine. Just as well, I should say. But Penns Creek has a lot of that kind of structure where there are big pools and then fast water. This is the Rapid River in Maine, and my buddy is fighting a big brookie in the slow side, but right behind him is fast water. So if you wanted to fish both, you would have to either change flies or have a fly that can handle both. I would catch fish in the faster water using Mickey fins. Worked like a charm. I caught a bunch of fish on Mickey fins in the faster water because, you know, the bulk in that hair wing would scrunch down, and as it goes through the turbulence, is doing this. All right. We would catch, in the slower water, we catch a lot of fish on these feather wings. Now, this is a small version. Some of them are a bit bigger. Something to think about with feather wings. When you go small, they get stiffer. And they work better in more turbulent conditions. So when you get a big feather wing, it scrunches down and looks like nothing in fast current. But you get a small one, it's fairly stiff. And it works pretty good in fast current. So size plays into it when you're dealing with feather wings. But caught a lot of fish. This one's caught a lot of fish in Maine, and I had slightly larger versions of this that did very well, and caught quite a few fish. But the Mickey fin in turbulent conditions was the winner there. And again, that's that bucktail doing this in the current. But where my buddy's fishing, feather wings. You notice I've got the Weimer here. The Weimer would work in both. Right here, I'm fighting a pink salmon, and I caught it on the Weimer, the brown trout Weimer. In fact, I got 30-something hookups on pink salmon with that Weimer in the space of like about an hour. My arm got tired. I had to quit. Oh, what a shame, eh? But you know, you see the look at the water. You've got some relatively slower flows in front of me. You've got fast water further out. So if I cast into the faster water and swung into the slower water, you want a fly that'll handle both. You don't want a fly that looks dead when it comes into the slow water, or you don't want a fly that looks flattened in the faster water. Because there were Chinook underneath that fast water, and if you got the fly down to them, you had a shot at them. So, you know, you've got to keep in mind that they're, you know, especially when you're out fishing out west in September, you got all sorts of different species in the water. This is again the Campbell River, and you can see off to the right, we've got that fast water. You'd cast into that and swing out. That's a classic case where we would use that Western pattern with a stiffer, higher wing. If you want to fish that fast water, you go in there with it, and that wing bends over and just vibrates. Works like a charm. When you get into the slower water, that thing opens up a little bit. You have to make a decision where you want to fish. And a lot of the fish were hitting on the slow water, which is why my Weimer was working, because it would move into the slow water and still work. So I'm not saying you won't catch a fish on the Western pattern. In slow water, you will. It's just the proportions. You know, and as to say, I did quite well out there with regular bucktails as well. Okay, this is the Grand River. Again, it's a moderate flow. I would use something like my Perch Pattern or any similar constructed streamer. Like either one of these two would be fine as long as they're stripped. Because with those long shank hooks, it tends to sag. The feather wing would work. This little guy would work. You know, you know, in that sort of current, you got to be aware of what your fly looks like when you're swinging it. So on these longer shank hooks, I would be swinging and stripping. I wouldn't just rely on the swing speed only. It would look rather dead, or you get the big hook sag. But, you know, as long as you're moving the fly, you're going to catch something in that. And yeah, I do quite well with the Weimer pattern in the Grand River as well as the conventional streamers. I've caught a lot of fish on conventional streamers as well there. This is 18 Mile in western New York, and there are places that are quite turbulent and boulder gardeny. You know, you've got boulders everywhere, lots of turbulence, perfect place for a western style pattern. Yeah, get that wing vibrating, away you go. You're good for a lot of fish. I should mention I'm using a wet fly example here. It's simply because I don't have a good example in my bucktails, because I tend to flatten the wing a little bit for my local river. But so I'm using the wet fly example just so you can see what I'm talking about with the angled wing. But you can do the same thing with a streamer. This is Penn's Creek again, and actually I hooked some really nice browns right at the bottom left in this picture. It's flatter and slower higher up, and then it speeds up, and you've got a lot of pocket water below. There's lots of boulders in there, and I swung the streamer through there. I think I hooked up 4 big browns in that stretch using the Weimer. It's a lovely spot to fish, and being able to fish both the top and the bottom, having a fly that will work in both slow and fast, was a real big advantage. I could simply move downstream and not think about it. I just concentrated on the fishing, not worrying about what fly I had on the end. And yeah, it was a great time. It was a lovely spot to fish that fly. In fact, I really built that fly with that in mind. Okay, this is a small creek in North Carolina. I won't say the name or where it is exactly, but high gradient, lots of white water. Perfect example for a fly with a kicked up wing. Whether it's you know, a wet fly or a streamer, when you get into that heavy current, it's going to knock that wing down and make it vibrate, which is exactly what you're looking for. And I would go with smaller streamers in here. I wouldn't use big ones. This little feather wing will work just fine because, as I said, when you shrink a feather wing, it gets proportionally stiffer. So you could make that work in this current. Whereas if it was a bigger version, it wouldn't work nearly as well. So it's something to keep in mind that we always talk about big rivers for streamers, but we can talk about little creeks as well. And, you know, providing you've got the right fly and the right technique, it works. Okay, this memory fails me. This is Upper Peninsula, Michigan. I can't remember if this is Trout Creek or Porcupine River. It's one or the other. And a perfect example where a classic Western pattern is going to work, because this just went down in steps. And, you know, you went over the step, it's turbulent, flattened out, turbulent, flattened out, turbulent. Use something with a bit of a kicked up wing and you're good to go. This one here, it's got a bit of a kicked up wing. That would work. I would use that there. And you could pretty well strip just in the slow water, but in the faster water, you could just swing it. You don't need to put any additional action. It'll kick around in those turbulent currents, no problem. So something to think about when you've got that stepping motion. You have to realize that once you clear the fast water, you have to start to strip. And this is the Rapid River, again, in Maine. And you can see how the gradient just drops off and turns into a boulder garden. Perfect example of where you want that kicked up wing to make it work. Feather wings in here, the bigger ones. Little ones, okay. Big ones, not so much. And let's see, I can't remember where we're moving on to. Oh yes, we're back at the Campbell. We got a boulder garden here. And boulder gardens can hold fish. Caught plenty of fish in boulder gardens over the years. Perfect place to use the kicked up wing because there's a lot of turbulence in there. There's another spot in lower flows on the Salmon River where I think it's called the Meadows, if I remember correctly, or the DSR. It's just a relatively flat run full of boulders and enough gradient that it moves, and the turbulence in there, and you fish a fly like this with the kicked up wing, bang, 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 as you go through that. Works like a charm. You just look at the water. If you see turbulence, think kicked up wing. And if you're looking at flat water, think flat wing. You know, it's not that difficult a concept to get through. And then you could design a fly or tie a fly that will manage both. And finally, we're stopping at the Stamp River on Vancouver Island. Lots of turbulence there, lots of broken water, lots of white water. And that pool at the bottom left had about 100 sockeye salmon in it. You know, it's amazing river to fish. And again, typical Western pattern with that kicked up wing, and you're good to go. So, you know, I would really pay attention to the water you're using and the construction of your fly and think, is it going to work where it's turbulent? Is it going to work where it's flat? My home river, the Grand, you know, we have some riffles, we have some pools. You don't need that Western style with a kicked up wing. Flat wing is going to work, you know, and just so think about it when you walk to the river. Just don't grab your streamer box and tie something on because it's pretty. You know, think about the current speed, the turbulence, whether you're going to have to strip it or you can swing it. Put all that into your thought processes before you tie on the first fly. And you'll have a lot better results if you've got the right fly for the right conditions. So keep that in mind. Cheers.